Profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.
Hello and welcome to Engage for Success Radio and show number 649 in our weekly series. Engage for Success is a not-for-profit movement and the UK's leading voice on the topic of employee engagement. We are out there raising awareness and running events through our area networks right around the country, and our topic and sector-specific thought and action groups are developing research, publishing case studies, and highlighting all the best practice that's going on out there. Now, you can find out more by visiting engageforsuccess.org. And while you're there, why not sign up for our weekly newsletter, ensuring you never miss out on any of our excellent free resources, events, and updates. And I'm Andy Gorham, your host for today's show and the founder of BizJuicer, where I help organizations become stickier from the inside out by creating workplaces where people genuinely want to stay, contribute, and perform at their best. Well, my friends, today we're exploring a question that potentially many organizations may not have stopped to ask themselves. We've spent years helping organizations define their purpose. We've helped leaders create compelling visions. We've written values, produced engagement strategies, launched employer brands, and yet employee engagement remains stubbornly low. In fact, it's receding in places at the moment. So perhaps the problem isn't that organizations lack purpose. Perhaps the problem is that employees struggle to find meaning in the work that they do every day. My guest today believes that there's an important distinction between those two things. Angela Rixon is the CEO of the Centre for Meaningful Work and author of Meaning Over Purpose, where she argues that organizations need to move beyond simply communicating purpose and start creating the conditions where people genuinely experience meaningful work. So today, in what I expect to be a packed 30-minute conversation, we'll explore what Angela calls the purpose to meaning gap, why it matters, and how leaders can close it to create more engaged, resilient, and higher performing organizations. Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. Delighted to be here.
Super to have you here. I'm really interested in this meaningful work and the purpose to meaning gap, which I'm sure we'll get into. Before we run all excited and giddy into that sort of conversation, do us a favor, just introduce yourself briefly to the audience. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hello, everybody. So Angela Rixon, I set up a business about 4 years ago now, the Centre for Meaningful Work. My background is over 25 years in corporate roles. I actually started in HR, so engagement was a topic that I was very, very close to. And then I moved into change and growth type roles. And then I ended up in consulting before I set up my own business. And whatever the focus has been for any sector that I've worked in, it's always been about the people for me, and really trying to help organizations understand how to unlock the revenue possibilities of people, but also really importantly to ensure that there's a great experience for employees whilst they are delivering that value to an organization.
And that is, I expect, a journey that many listeners will empathize with, different departments all coming to the same thing. We're all kindred spirits here.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't have lots of time, so let's just get into the meat and bones of it, shall we? The challenge I think many organizations are sort of wrestling with today, despite whatever report you read, millions, billions of pounds or dollars invested in engagement and engagement strategies, and yet the levels remain stubbornly low. The latest sort of workplace reports all suggest it's going backwards. Why do you think we are where we are? What are the sort of driving forces behind this kind of stagnation in your perspective, Angela?
Well, there are several things I think coming together at the same time at this point, Andy. And I think the first one I would say is engagement is very much informed by managers and leaders and the experience that employees have. And I really do believe that managers are the squeezed middle at the moment. They're required to deliver metrics and outcomes in terms of numbers, employees, what have different needs. And I think they're feeling really squeezed at the moment. And actually, I think a lot of them are suffering in silence. there's a lot of change happening. They haven't navigated some of this change before. So what we're finding in some of the global engagement surveys is actually engagement for managers is in decline. It's gone down like 9 points in one of the global surveys. And so actually, as managers have a critical role in engaging teams, their engagement is declining. So I think that's a massive issue in itself. And for them, actually, they're more stressed. They're actually feeling quite angry because they're not getting prior notice of a change coming, as an example. So they're incredibly frustrated. They're feeling isolated and lonely. So actually, a lot of the research is showing that they're sadder, more frustrated, more angry, more lonely than what I would call individual contributors. So I think there's a massive issue there, but that's not the only issue. That's just one of them. And then if we look at employees, what's happening for them? Well, workload pressures are increasing. They're fearful about jobs, particularly with things like AI coming in at the moment. So there's massive issues. And part of it is also thinking about, now we work in more of a hybrid environment. Actually, that's creating less connection. So you know what it's like. Work can be busy. You can be really under, a lot of pressure to deliver. But if you're part of a really good team, that can really change how you feel about it. But actually, that team's really disconnected now. And then, to be honest, another point might be more controversial, but I think there's a lot of lip service still made around employee engagement. I know it's the key metric from a people point of view. I worked with one organisation where the way that they dealt with their employee engagement strategy was to have a one-to-one with every employee when they were filling out their survey and asking them why they wouldn't give each element a 10. And when you look at that, you just think, what is going on here? This has this has turned into management reporting and not actually a genuine desire to really think about how employees can thrive and how that's better for business and humanity overall. And when I wrote the book, Meaning Over Purpose, going a bit more macro around this is some of the forces are AI, as an example. So AI is coming in, it's faster. We don't really know about everything that's going to come as a result of AI. I always like to go back to the internet and think, well, around job loss and concerns for jobs which are lost, there would be new jobs created. But it's asking a lot of people to lean into that change and to think about how they can adapt, whilst also remembering what makes them unique as individuals. And this is where meaning comes in. When you bring in something like AI, the question is, well, what's my role now? What's my purpose? What's unique? And what's the area that I'm actually going to add value in? So I think AI is a big one, as well as this challenge around burnout. We're in a burnout epidemic still within many organisations. People are still really struggling with short-term results pressures and more change coming in and more change coming in. And then also with different generations now, younger generations are looking for different things from work. They have a different set of values, including meaning. So as an example, they're more likely to take a job where it's more meaningful for them and there's an impact that the organisation is having that they think is positive over a role where it's just about the money. And actually, interestingly, I'm seeing that meaning is actually cutting across all generations now. There is something about the way that we've worked before. We're now questioning that. We want a different employee value proposition. It's not just about the salary and the promotions. And actually, organisations are struggling to deliver that as the employee value proposition. So what are the other things that people are looking for? And then the final thing is about hybrid, as I've mentioned. So now that hybrid is here, what does that mean in terms of how that's changing work and what people want from work? We need to make that connection piece much stronger than it's ever been before.
So not much then.
Not
much.
Sorry, quite a list there. I'm obviously passionate about this subject.
Not much going on there. I mean, goodness me. I mean, that feels weighty just thinking about it, doesn't it? And it's just, and the things that you've kind of covered there, no surprise. These are not uncommon things to talk about here in this forum, or I'm sure the rooms we both walk into, the organizations we try and help. Is it any wonder it's a complex issue that there isn't just one thing to kind of solve them all? But you've mentioned meaning a lot, so let's get into the heart of your book. You've deliberately called it meaning over purpose, and purpose has had a lot of press and a lot of push previously. So meaning over purpose, I mean, that's a chunky old bold statement. I like that. Um, Explain to us the difference. Don't want to assume we understand the difference. What's the difference between purpose and meaning from your perspective, and why does that distinction really matter, Angela?
So, purpose is the organization's purpose, what it stands for, its mission. Often, organizations will have, brilliant, well crafted, thoughtful purpose statements. Something like building a better working world would be an example of that. And meaning is different in that it's the felt experience of an employee at work. And I talk about something called the purpose to meaning gap. And what I mean by that is the distance between the purpose that's announced and what an employee really experiences in their day-to-day work. So let's take the example of a purpose statement, which is to build a better working world. If the experience of employees are not having autonomy, not feeling a sense of connection at work, not feeling that their manager is supporting their development, well, we're talking about this building a better working world, but actually for me, I'm working in an environment that's not really delivering that. And I'm not finding that connection myself, either to what's meaningful for me or that connection to the organization purpose.
And are there any common warning signs that you have noticed, documented, researched that would say, I don't know, people maybe understand the mission that the business is on,
Yeah.
but really don't feel connected to it, and therefore it doesn't really have any impact on what they do? And if so what have you found?
So I found that people will see the annual meeting, town hall, or the documents about what the purpose is. So they'll understand it at a sort of intellectual level, what it is. But the signs would be things like nodding,
Mhm.
but actually not feeling really excited about what the purpose is, not being able to articulate about what they do or what their team does, how that relates to what that purpose is. And a lot of it, I think, when we think about things like, well, what do you see in terms of engagement? To me, engagement is energy. So, what's the energy in the team? What's the energy with individuals around that purpose? Are they excited? Are they really excited to get into work on a Monday? Lots to do, lots to achieve, and it's all about achieving this purpose. Or is it Sunday night and they're dreading going to work on Monday for various reasons? It might be that they're feeling quite isolated. It might be that the culture doesn't feel supportive, isn't empowering of them. So there's lots of things that I would say are warning signals. And sometimes I think if employees are quiet in the organisation, I'd be concerned about that.
Mm.
Much better to hear what people think about, like, the purpose, what they need to do in terms of their role, what their views are. So I think when employees are quiet, I also see that as a warning sign.
Mhm. And other than those things, how do you help, I guess, leaders recognize that there's this gap, as you've described it, alive and existing in their organization? Because people could be quiet for ages and nothing's happened to this point. So is there anything specific you're doing with leadership in organizations to get them, I guess, more acutely aware of what's happening and then what they can do about it?
Yeah, so I like to think about how does this come alive in different scenarios. So I've
Mm,
done a lot of change in my background. So let's take a change program. So there's a team, they're delivering business as usual. There's a change that's coming in. I think a real question for leaders is if employees are very resistant to that change or very passive around that change, but not energized about it, then that's where I would say to them, right, we really need to think about how are we translating what the why is of this change. How does this then align to what the organization purpose is? So I found that with leaders, one, it's about taking them on their own meaningful work journey. So what's important to them about work. And actually, I think often for leaders, they're so in the day-to-day of work, the opportunity to just step back and go, actually, what really matters to me as a leader? What do I stand for? How do I find meaning can actually be really powerful. And then the other side of it is, what are the tools that they can use? So I've got the 5 leadership behaviors which help them create the conditions for meaningful work. So it's looking at the signals, thinking about when you want to get things done, how employees are reacting, and then also thinking about, so what can you do as a leader to help enable more energy, and that energy can be realized through meaningful work.
I think there's a couple of things I just want to pick up on there, because I think that's really interesting. The resistant and passive juxtaposed position of an employee, because that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because for me, engagement isn't always about agreeing, right? Engagement is giving a monkeys, having an interest, and feeling, I guess, with a bit of psychological safety, your ability to kind of challenge those things or question those things or say, I don't kind of get that. So I like that difference between resistant, which could still be engaged, whereas passive is very much don't really care, doesn't have anything to do with me. So I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of watch out for. And the 5 behaviors that you mentioned, are you able to just share that as a framework for people to kind of get their heads around?
Yeah, for sure. So the 5 behaviors, the first one is modeling. So the modeling is starting with you and actually how you show up authentically about your own values. So as an example, let's say you're leading a change program, and as a leader, you're not 100% bought into what the change program is trying to deliver. So you can actually model that and say, there's a business need to do this. I'm not 100% sure myself, but this is something that we are all going to move forwards with. So it's good to be open and express your own psychological safety, your own position with that. The second is really important, and there's a massive gap, which is about translating. So it's about translating the purpose. So what's happening is organizations are assuming that individuals and teams can join the dots themselves between an organization purpose and what they do. But what's really helpful is if the leader can help with that. So let's say you're in a team meeting, and at the beginning of the meeting, you've got an agenda and you've got lots of different pieces to cover. What you could do is say, right, let's just pause and just step back and think about, when we think about these different things that we're doing, what's the why behind this? Why is this important? How does this connect to what the organization is trying to do overall? And then the third one is about coaching. So we are still in an environment, particularly with squeezed managers and leaders, where the default is around control and tell. And then, of course, they're in expert mode. They're in a trap, because then employees will always be coming to them for the answer. So the third one is to coach people, and coaching helps them to grow, but it also helps them to become more self-sufficient over time. So that's the third enabling one. And then the fourth one is about connecting teams and people, particularly because of the hybrid piece. Connection is being affected a lot because of hybrid. So actually, how can the leader, let's take the team meeting example again, rather than go straight into task or downloading, is actually spend a little bit of time, a couple of minutes at the beginning of the meeting, connecting, talking about things, talking about informal things. And then the final one is celebration, and it's celebrating what really matters. So as well as outcomes, it's also about the effort. It's how the teams are pulling together, people who go the extra mile. So they're the sort of 5 behaviors that create the conditions for meaningful work.
I love that. But you've led me beautifully into a little question for you, because let me state my case first, Angela.
Okay.
I'm with you. I stand by you as an ally. I love the whole thing about meaningful work. Part of my own mission is about helping people have more fulfilling work lives. I'm with you. I'm totally with you. However, if I put my ear to the speakers, I can hear grumbling. I can hear people going, oh, this all sounds a little bit pink and a little bit fluffy and a little bit soft, all this meaning malarkey. What would you say to those people who would potentially mock or think that this is some sort of soft practice? What would you say to them?
There are 2 things that I say to them.
Are you allowed to say them on air? Are these?
Please just understand. The first one is, let's look at the evidence and the data. And McKinsey is a reputable organisation from a research perspective, and they actually did some research around meaningful work. So I want to share that. And what they found is that employees who find their work more meaningful are actually 33% more productive. So that has like a bottom line impact for organisations. They're also 75% more committed. And we know that there is still a war for talent, and we really do want to retain and keep the right talent and avoid the sort of silent people where there's a quiet quitting, where people are there but they're passive. So it really tackles that one. And 49% of employees who have meaningful work are less likely to leave. So I think there are some really good evidential stats from McKinsey, actually, which is helpful. But then the second piece here, which I think is really important, is meaningful work creates self-led teams. And the reason why it does is if you imagine that you've got a team of individuals and they're really connected to, how can I do this job? How have I got autonomy to do this job? I understand what the role is, but I've got some autonomy in terms of how I deliver that job. Am I developing in my job? Am I developing mastery? Am I feeling a sense of purpose that my work matters? Do I feel a sense of connection with my colleagues? Do I see the end impact of my work, whether it's on clients, community, my colleagues at work? And what that does is then people start to lead themselves and the teams start to lead themselves. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't a role for leadership, there is, but then the leaders can spend less time on managing, less time on control, less time on telling, and more time on setting an inspiring vision, doing the things that I mentioned around those 5 behaviors with translate and coach. And I think actually what leaders can think about in terms of the return on investment for meaningful work not being soft is how can they really empower their teams so that they are not squeezed so much by having to do so much detailed day-to-day management for teams. So that's my second argument.
So you're not having it. You're not having it. You're not.
I'm fighting here.
I'm with you, Angela. I think it's not really about making people happier, right? This is about creating the conditions for better performance. And the numbers that you've quoted, and McKinsey aren't the only source of these things, are they? But they're reputable. But at the end of the day, there are enough now hard measures that can show you the benefit of this sort of stuff, right? But as if investing in your people had to be convincing to be a good thing. It sounds nonsense, I think, when you start questioning that. But measurement brings me on to an interesting thing. Yes. So meaning, I mean, for years we've been measuring engagement. We'll measure happiness now. We'll measure all sorts of bits and pieces. Yeah. Can we measure meaning? And if so, how do we do that?
We can measure meaning. So I see the difference between like lead indicators and lag indicators. So engagement is an output. So I'd say that is a lag indicator. So what I'm interested in meaning as a lead indicator. So what you can do, and I think about it overall in terms of like energy. So meaning is the input and engagement is the output of energy. That's how it shows up. And yes, you can measure it. So I've got a tool called Meaning Metrics, and there are 4 elements to that tool. The first is alignment. So do I connect with what this organization stands for? So it's alignment to them as an individual, to what the organization's purpose and values are. The second is growth. Am I learning? Am I progressing? Or am I developing? And then the third is connection. Do I feel safe? Do I feel a part of something here? Do I feel seen and valued? And the fourth one is a word that you don't see as much. It's resonance. So does my work energize me? Does it feel worthwhile? So you can measure those things, and you can measure those as inputs to employee engagement or as part of employee engagement if you want to as well.
And in your work to date, I mean, I always ask these stupid questions because as soon as someone shows me a formula for measuring something, I'm like, oh, okay, so what do you see? So out of those 4 input measures, Do you
Mm,
see some consistent patterns today in the work that you look at? Because instantly I look at that list
yeah,
and I mean, you mentioned resonance being like a different word, and thinking about your answer to the first question today with all this kind of like weight on people.
yeah.
It looks to me like you would see that as a tough measure for people right now. Is that what you see?
That is absolutely what I see. I am seeing like connection has been an issue, but actually there's been more strategies to deal with connection.
Uh-huh.
Resonance and energy. I think the problem is like the work pressure, and also the culture is really challenging in terms of that resonance measure at the moment, because
Mm,
there's more things going in rather than actually how can we really think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how that can be an antidote or a mitigator to some of that work pressure, which it can be.
yeah. I'm just thinking, again, you mentioned the pressure, and to me, that just triggers me back to the manager piece we talked about at the beginning, this kind of under pressure, frozen middle,
Yes.
trying to translate the strategy into action for the people that they're managing.
Mm,
If I could give you access to all the managers listening, and you can just whisper one thing in their ear to go and maybe make a change or feel some difference or add some meaning to their team's day-to-day work, what
yeah.
would you be whispering in their ears, Angela?
I think one of the biggest bangs you can get for your buck at the moment is the translate piece. So, what's happening is people are in a storm of work, doing next task, next task.
Mm,
I think just slowing down and saying, right, let's just step back and talk about this, talk about why this matters now, how this connects to the overall purpose. What that does is really helps employees to go, oh, okay, oh, I kind of understand why we're doing this now. It's not just a change, it's not just another lot of things that I need to do. I'm understanding why this is important, and
mm.
therefore I can get behind it more. So I think that translate piece is something where I'm seeing leaders that are starting to do more of that really see some positive results, because employees are, becoming more open, more adaptable to some of those changes coming down the line.
Yeah. And if for the general listenership today, if there's one thing you want them to remember out of this conversation, what would that takeaway be, Angela? What would you want them to think about?
I would want them to think about going into their next meeting and or one to one and just saying, what's meaningful for you and why? And just start to have that question around what meaningful is. So that starts to create a conversation, and really importantly, listen to the answer.
What a novel idea. What, what a novel idea. Listen, and you might actually hear some stuff, right? Fabulous. Look, I think this topic is really interesting. I think the book sounds amazing. If people would like to track you down after this conversation today, Angela, and by the way, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your insights. Really fascinating stuff. Absolutely love it. But if people want to track you down, find the book, all that kind of good stuff, where should they go looking?
Brilliant. Well, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's an obvious place. Angela Rixon there. Also, the website, the Centre for Meaningful Work. And for the book, you can find it in all of the retailers. Amazon is great because there's reviews there. So that always helps to get a review. Thank you very much if you do that for me. That would be wonderful, as well as Waterstones and all of the others. And actually, with the book, I wrote that it's evidence based. I interviewed 100 leaders around what meaning was for them. I did a lot of research as part of a master's. And when I wrote the book, I wanted it to be accessible. So I've written it as a story, it's a narrative, and hopefully it will mean that you can see yourself in the story if you do decide to read it.
I love that. I think there are more than enough dull business books on the shelves. Let's have a good old story with some facts behind it, and with a real meaning behind it, if we can, to try and help people have a better time at work and perform better. Angela, I've loved meeting you. It's been lovely hearing this stuff. I wish you all the very best with the book. Um, so Thea, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Okay, gang. Well, that's all we have time for today. Don't forget, go and visit engageforsuccess.org, check out the show notes, and explore all of the free employee engagement resources. And don't forget, While you're there, you can download or stream any of the previous episodes of Engage for Success Radio. We will be back at the same time next week. I'm Eddie Gorham, and thanks for listening to Engage for Success Radio.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.